supported my family for years, paying their rent, groceries, and car bills. The first time I needed help, my dad said, "You're not our problem." 8 days later, they were in my driveway, begging. I'm 32M, and I never thought I'd be the one writing something like this. But here I am at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, replaying the last week in my head. 8 days ago, I made a choice that completely changed my life and my family's. I stopped being their ATM. For 6 long years, I had been the financial backbone holding everything together. When Dad lost his job after the factory shut down, things got bad fast. Mom's part-time retail gig barely covered their medications, and my younger sister had dropped out of college, moving back home with 2 kids after her boyfriend vanished. What started as a temporary lifeline quickly became permanent. I paid the rent, bought the groceries, covered the car payments, and handled every emergency that popped up. At first, I didn't mind. I had a stable job in tech, earned decent money, and lived modestly. Family helps family, at least that's what I believed. But months turned into years, and the requests never stopped. New tires for Dad's truck, daycare fees for my sister, Mom's dental work, emergency repairs, birthday gifts. There was always some urgent need. Then, 3 weeks ago, my breaking point arrived. I collapsed at work with a stabbing pain in my abdomen and ended up in the hospital with a ruptured appendix and complications that kept me there for 5 days. The pain was bad, but the real wound came later. Lying in a hospital bed, weak and groggy, I called Dad and asked if someone could pick me up when I was discharged and maybe help me for a few days while I recovered. There was a long, cold silence. For a second, I thought the call had dropped. Then Dad's voice came through, flat and detached. I was a grown man and needed to figure things out myself. "You're not our responsibility," he said. Those words hit harder than any scalpel or 6 years of rent payments, grocery bills, and car notes. 6 years of putting their needs above my own, and suddenly I wasn't their responsibility. The man whose house I had saved from foreclosure was leaving me to recover alone. I took an Uber home after discharge and spent 3 days barely able to move, surviving on crackers and water. My boss was compassionate and gave me 2 weeks off, but I used most of it alone in my apartment, reflecting on the reality of my life. That's when the decision crystallized. I was done. I grabbed my laptop and started cutting the financial cords that had kept my family afloat. I removed my credit card from their grocery delivery account, called the landlord to stop paying their rent, and even contacted the car loan company to end my payments. For the first time in 6 years, their financial survival wasn't my responsibility. The first few days were silent. Too silent. Rent was due on the 1st, and I knew the fridge was probably empty. I knew Dad's truck payment was overdue, but I also knew they had made their choice when they told me I wasn't their problem. Then, on the morning of the 8th day, I heard car doors slam in my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Dad's truck, Mom climbing out of the passenger seat, and my sister in the back with her 2 kids. They looked frantic, desperate in a way I'd never seen. Moments later, my doorbell rang, followed by pounding and shouting. Dad was demanding answers, Mom was crying, and my sister was yelling about her kids going hungry. I opened the door and faced the people I had loved and supported for years as they berated me in my own home. That's when everything inside me changed. I asked a single question. "Where were you when I was in the hospital?" The room fell silent. Dad stuttered something about being busy, Mom sniffled, and my sister muttered excuses. But I reminded them of Dad's exact words, "You're not our responsibility," and told them those words had freed me from being theirs. The argument that followed was brutal. Accusations, guilt trips, tears. Every manipulative trick they had used for years came out. But I stood firm. I listed the numbers $62,000 over 6 years, money I gave out of love, and the one time I needed care, not money, they abandoned me. Dad's anger turned to pleading, Mom begged for her grandkids, and my sister demanded I think of family. But I had already made my choice. I told them they had 48 hours to figure things out and to leave my property. 2 days passed without a word. On the 3rd day, Mom showed up alone, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen her. She tried a different approach, the guilt trip. She reminded me she carried me for 9 months, raised me, sacrificed for me. She painted a picture of their desperation, of Dad applying for minimum wage jobs, of my sister trying to work without childcare. I listened quietly until she slipped and admitted the truth. Dad had refused 2 job offers because they were beneath him. Warehouse and retail work, jobs millions of people do to survive, were apparently too degrading for a man who'd been living on his son's charity for 6 years. That night, Dad called from an unknown number. His voice cracked as he admitted the lights were off. The kids were crying, and they didn't know what to do. He asked what it would take for me to forgive them. I told him forgiveness and financial support were not the same thing. I could work toward forgiving them, but my wallet was closed forever. 2 weeks later, I learned from our elderly neighbor that they had been evicted and moved out in the middle of the night. Part of me felt guilty, but another part of me felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't drowning in their problems. I booked a real vacation, beachfront hotel, no penny pinching, and watched the sunset without checking my phone for emergency requests. When I came home, a letter was waiting. It was from Dad. A typed letter, different from any message he'd ever sent. He apologized, truly apologized, for everything. He admitted they had taken advantage of me and that his words in the hospital were unforgivable. He didn't ask for money. He just wanted a chance to rebuild our relationship. 6 months have passed since that morning in my driveway. The angry calls stopped after the first month, the guilt trips after the second. Now, for the first time in years, we have a real family relationship. Mom sends me pictures of the small garden she started at my aunt's house. My sister updates me on her part-time job and the kids' schoolwork, sounding tired but proud. Dad works at a hardware store and talks about fixing things and feeling useful again. He no longer sounds like the broken man who depended on my paycheck to survive. Do I feel guilt sometimes? Of course. But then I look at my savings, the promotion I earned because I wasn't drowning in family crises, and the peace I found on that Florida beach. I remember that loving your family doesn't mean letting them drain you dry. Real love doesn't come with a price tag. The man who told me I wasn't his responsibility was right about one thing. I'm not responsible for fixing everyone else's problems. But he was wrong about another. Family isn't about money. It's about respect, care, and showing up when it matters. 6 months ago, they were begging in my driveway. Today, we're all stronger, and for the first time, I finally love my family without hating myself. 6 months after that life-changing decision, things had settled into a rhythm I never expected. I had stepped back from the role of the provider, and my family had finally been forced to face the reality of their own lives. The first real shift happened when I visited them for the first time since the confrontation. They were living with my mom's sister in another state. The house was modest and a little cramped, but there was a sense of effort in the air, a feeling I hadn't felt from them in years. Dad met me at the door with calloused hands and a tired but genuine smile. He wore a hardware store uniform and seemed almost proud of it. For the first time in a long while, he looked like a man who had taken back some of his dignity. Mom hugged me so tightly I could feel the tremor in her arms. She didn't cry this time. She just held me and whispered that she missed me. My sister was different too. There was a weight in her eyes, but also a spark of something new. Pride, maybe. She told me she had started working part-time at a local credit union while the kids were in school. The kids ran to me, laughing and happy, holding up drawings they had made. It struck me then that even after all the anger, tears, and silence, they were still my family. I could love them without sacrificing myself for them. We sat around my aunt's kitchen table, eating a simple meal of spaghetti and garlic bread. No fancy takeout, no expensive groceries, just something they had cooked together. It wasn't the awkward, tense atmosphere I had expected. Felt normal. Dad spoke about his coworkers and how satisfying it was to fix things with his hands. Mom shared stories about her garden, how she spent her afternoons planting flowers and growing vegetables behind my aunt's house. My sister told me about the credit union customers and the little victories she felt when she finished a long day on her own merit. At one point, Dad cleared his throat and said, "I know we hurt you, son. I know I failed you as a father when you needed me most. I can't take that back, but I can make sure it never happens again. The room was quiet for a long moment after that. I realized then that this was what I had wanted all along. Not their dependence, not their endless gratitude, but their respect. I wanted to be part of a family, not an open wallet with a pulse. Over the next few months, our relationship slowly rebuilt itself. The angry phone calls and guilt trips were gone. In their place were pictures of Mom's blooming garden, my niece's school projects, and Dad's small victories at work. My sister even sent me a short video of the kids singing happy birthday to me. Something that hadn't happened in years because they were always too busy asking for help to celebrate anything else. I started to feel a peace I hadn't known in so long, a sense that I could love them from a distance without being consumed. Then, about 9 months after I first said no, I received another package in the mail. Inside was a framed photograph of all of us from years ago, long before the factory shut down, before the money, and the begging and the resentment. We were standing together at a park, smiling, sun in our faces, carefree. On the back of the frame was a note in Dad's handwriting. To new beginnings and lessons learned. Thank you for saving us in more ways than one. I stared at that frame for a long time, and for the first time, I felt the last bit of anger slip away. That night, I put the photo on my mantle and thought about everything it had taken to get here. I had spent $62,000 and 6 years learning that generosity without boundaries is just self-destruction. I had learned that loving your family doesn't mean enabling them, and that sometimes the hardest no can lead to the best yes later. My father was right when he said I wasn't his responsibility, but he was wrong to think that meant I didn't matter. I mattered enough to finally teach all of us a lesson that saved more than just money. Today, I love my family in a way that is healthy, balanced, and real. I no longer feel like their crutch or their solution. I am simply their son, brother, and uncle, and that is enough. And for the first time in years, I can look at that framed picture and smile without resentment, because I finally understand that sometimes the best gift you can give your family is the chance to stand on their own.